discussing today's topics from an African American perspective. This is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Before we begin our discussion with the Another View Roundtable, let me remind you that our next Race Let's Talk About It Town Hall will be held next Thursday, November the 19th, from 6 until 8 p.m. here at WHRO. We will continue our conversation about privilege, power, and difference, a candid look at the controversial issue of white privilege. We actually now have a waiting list to get into the town hall, so let me encourage you to register for our online screening of the event. It's a live webcast of the town hall, and you can still be a part of the discussion by submitting your questions and comments online. Go to whro.org/talkaboutrace to sign up to watch and chat live online. And now to our Another View Roundtable. You know our panelists. Roger Chesley is a columnist for the Virginian-Pilot, and you can read his columns every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Hey, Roger.
Hello. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to see you again.
Always good to see you.
Bill Thomas is our community activist. Hi, Bill.
Good afternoon, Barbara. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good,
How are you doing
good,
today?
Good. I'm just as peachy as pie.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And Will LaVeist is our talk show host, author, journalist, hardest working man in America. How you doing, Will?
How you doing, Barbara? Always a pleasure.
Good. And Carol could not be with us today, so we miss her, and we just hope that she's doing well. But we have kind of our own little version of Left, Right, and Center.
Which
sitting
one
here.
is which?
Roger to the left, Bill to the right, and Will in the center.
Only you don't have me sitting in the center. But
No,
that's
I don't, but that's okay. Just from your perspective. So let's get started. So, student protests all over the country in support of students at the University of Missouri. After months of protests, a hunger strike, and the football team refusing to play, the president and chancellor both resigned. As part of this, I heard a new term yesterday, PWI, which stands for Predominantly White Institution, as opposed to HBCU. It's very interesting what's happening on our college campuses.
That's an old term,
these
though,
days.
PWI.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah. It's old.
Well, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I was not aware.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, at any rate.
Academic circles.
Academic circles, it must be. And since I'm not in academia, I missed that one. But what's going on with our college campuses, Roger, in terms of protesting?
Well, you have a certain activism that's going on, which is good that there are students on campus who seem to be involved and want changes and feel like some of their grievances aren't being addressed. I think there's something more so than race that's going on here, though. It seemed like the tipping point was when the football team, which means revenue, got involved, and when football players, mostly black players at the on the football team in Missouri said, we're not going to play, that seemed to, have gotten the attention of folks. You know, a much more broader audience came about, and I think it also shocked some of the administrators and the alumni of the school. And to me, that showed something about the power of athletics and of athletes on certain campuses, that they have some power that maybe they didn't really realize before. I'm glad that some of the grievances were finally heard. I'm not sure if change would have happened without the football team getting involved in it, though.
So they were talking about $1 million, there's my mic, I think, $1 million fine if they did not play, which really finally got people's attention.
And lost revenue.
Bill. Mm-hmm.
This is all about money. It has nothing to do. Nothing has changed. It's fake revolutionaries. It's really funny.
Fake revolutionaries.
I
Why do you say
wouldn't
that?
agree with that.
Why do you say that?
No, it's fake revolutionaries because all of these conditions, nothing has actually changed. Really, nothing. You have some kids, you have this gentleman, and I think it's all goodwill and want to feel good and all these kinds of things. But to have a statement of purpose, this is what we're here to change. This is what we're trying to do. There was no demands of anything but some issues related to race, which are irrelevant. You have a guy just faking hunger or whatever, been in school for 8 years. He's definitely going to be hungry after he starts paying those loans back. I'm just serious.
But he's a graduate student, right?
I'm serious.
But why would you say that race is not an issue, Will? Why does he say that, Will?
You're asking me to get into the mind of Bill?
Actually, I don't want to get in the mind of yours with the fake revolutionaries.
Well,
I didn't insult you. I'm just saying that I don't agree with it. I think it's fake revolutionaries. I don't think nothing has changed. If you look at what came out with SAT scores, these kids are barely able to finish school. The University of Missouri in Columbia, I'm from Kansas. That's one of the worst places in the world to go if you know anything about Missouri or Kansas. You know that. Oh. You do not go to Columbia, Missouri to go to school unless you're an athlete or unless you're going to go to school of journalism or for some other purpose. Otherwise, stay the hell away from there.
So you're saying that academically they're not the greatest?
Absolutely.
Well, I think what you mentioned about the athletes and the risk of losing revenue makes perfect sense because racism was created to advance interest in terms of revenue. You had a show last week when you talk about white privilege and how racism is a social construct. It's not even something that's real, but it was created to put into people's minds so that there's one group more superior to another group so that people can maintain their revenue and power. Mm-hmm. So it makes perfect sense that the only way you're going to unravel racism is if you deal with revenue, because that's what racism was created for. So Montgomery boycott. When it started affecting the revenue, right, you changed whether or not blacks could ride in the back of the bus or not. So as when you look at what's going on, we've been talking about this on our show for all these years. It's about systemic racism. So the things that are happening and the students are seeing what they're feeling are nothing more than the outcomes of the systemic racism that exists. Mm-hmm. So if you want to unravel it, what we need to do is to start realizing that racism is not real. There's nothing scientific that says that because your skin color is one color or another that makes you superior to somebody else. And to realize that it's only in place because of the desire to advance revenue.
Roger.
And I would disagree. I mean, obviously something changed because two of the top officials at the campus left. Now, do more things perhaps have to change in terms of the atmosphere there, in terms of the way people treat each other? Probably, but, as many folks would say, it's a good start when, the main official there who was perceived as not being actually answering these complaints, actually doing anything about them, he's gone now. And I think he was probably slow to figure out, just the severity of what was going on. And it wasn't just racist acts that were a problem. There were sexist and homophobic issues that were also being
and he stepped down
there.
Because of the risk of how it was going to affect the university and revenue. Mm-hmm. That's why he stepped down.
Well, we have some sound from him, as a matter of fact. Let's take a listen.
The frustration and anger that I see is clear, real, and I don't doubt it for a second. So the question really is, why did we get to this very difficult situation? It is my belief we stopped listening to each other. We didn't respond or react. We got frustrated with each other, and we forced individuals like Jonathan Butler to take immediate action or unusual steps to effect change. This is not, I repeat, not the way change should come about.
Now, Jonathan Butler, the young man who went on the hunger strike and had not eaten for, 8 days?
I think it was 8 days.
Or so. Bill, you're shaking your head.
No, I really, you don't know what you replaced. You don't know if this guy's any better than the guy that was there before. Nothing fundamentally has changed. Everything in America deals with money. I mean, we went to the fight in the Gulf for money. We started the Revolutionary War in America for money. When you stop talking to people, you get divorced. I mean, that's all just way things happen. But number one, let's get with the facts. Number one, there's supposed to have been some Klan running around Columbia. They haven't found those people yet. There's supposed to have been some people running around in a pickup truck yelling racial names. There's supposed to have been some kind of bad sign with regard to a swastika with whatever PTs on it or something. That hasn't been found. None of the issues.
That was found.
It's the same.
Bill, let's make sure we get factual now, because the swastika was found on the wall.
When?
It was in the dorm or wherever it happened. It's a police report for it. Yeah, so that was there.
The president just in that recording, the president just said,
I don't care what he said,
that these things that happen are real, and these things have been going on for several years. Mm-hmm. And what caused him to finally step down when it became a threat to his revenue, the university's revenue. Let's understand that all of us have moved on and had jobs and lost jobs and all of this. He stepped down. His pension and all those other things are very much in play. And believe me, he stepped down and got a nice parachute, too. He didn't step down. That's right. He's doing better off without the stress. So he moved away. They told him, you need to move on.
How much it costs?
Because you're messing up the revenue. And it's gotten to a powder keg point where now the university is being affected, and it's affecting one of our best cash cows. This program. Remember, Mizzou is where you had Michael Sam. Now we were talking about Michael Sam for the past 2 years, or what being the first outwardly gay, potentially professional athlete, and all of these issues were going on at the same time. Why was we weren't talking about this?
Maybe the protests weren't to the point among students really to bring this to a wider audience. I'm sure there's probably been some things there on campus that was known, but not necessarily to the wider audience.
To the point where it was affecting the revenue.
But here's my question also, though. What is it about the state of Missouri? Because I don't know the state of Missouri that well.
It's part of the United States of America.
No. That's what's. But I mean, when you look at Ferguson, now you're talking about the university. You're looking at what is going on there.
If you go all the way back to slavery time, all the way back, it was that border state where you had Kansas and you had Missouri and you had the Ferguson case and all these other things going on in Missouri because they were the transition states where the federal government was trying to force the people of the citizens of Virginia to do what the feds wanted to do, and they didn't want to do it. So this intense racism in Missouri and Kansas. In 1972, when I walked into camp at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas, they said, I won't say, y'all need to go home. Y'all don't need to come here. None of this has changed. It is still the same today. And if you look at any of these kids, actually there was a story in one of the newspapers the other day about PWI, predominantly white institutions, and HBCUs. I have never given a nickel to the University of Kansas and never will because they never dealt with any of this stuff. And Missouri was worse. And so what you found out, all of this slavery and racism and all this stuff, not liking black people, there were 22,000 white folks on campus when I went to the University of Kansas. There were 365 of us black folks. And all of these issues are the same. And Columbia was worse than Lawrence, Kansas. So all of these old issues that have been going on for 300, 400 years, none of them has ever been resolved. I would doubt that the population of black students at Missouri is probably less than 5 or 6%. The same thing there are at the University of Kansas, which is the same thing. The only way you see black folks is, and I'll give Will on this, is on the basketball court, on the football field, on the track field. Otherwise, the predominances of African Americans and our attitudes and things we want to do at these schools, these PWIs, are horrible.
Well, I thought it was interesting. Let me just make this one point, Roger, and then I'll bring you in. But we were talking with our interns before the show, and several of our interns attend HBCUs, and I asked them the question: why would an HBCU? Why are you all walking in solidarity with these students from University of Missouri? And their response was that they feel a kinship and a need to support these black students because they have a support system that students that attend predominantly white institutions do not have.
Right.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
And Bill has suggested nothing's changed, but I would say that if you allow it to stay the same, of course nothing's going to change. So yes, good for the students who are agitating, good for the attention that they've brought to the issue there. Now, you can say, well, are they exaggerating the conditions? Are they perhaps hyping what's going on there? Well, I think you would need to go there and see just exactly what's going on. But obviously, the ones who are there feel that there is a problem.
Well, they were also talking about the fact that they were receiving threats online, and that the Black Student Union turned into kind of a safe haven, if you will, this week, and people being escorted back and forth to class and so forth. Are you surprised, Will, in 2015 that people would still feel this need to kind of have to come together that way and be protected?
No, not surprised, because we're still in America that has systemic racism, had these issues never really clearly been dealt with head on. And online, people have that anonymity where they can, and it often reads the worst of the comments that people will make. And I think that we also shouldn't be remiss to recognize the number of white students and students of other backgrounds that are also standing with these students.
True.
Because people are looking at, look, systemic racism is not good for revenue anymore. That's what people are seeing. And they're seeing that, look, we're being affected by this kind of system and this kind of mess, regardless of our skin color in many cases. It has to do with class and other issues that are going on, too. And the other thing that I would add is, as a journalist, I think Missouri needs to really stop this mythology about being the best journalism school in the nation and all this foolishness. That's just straight up mythology, because when you've got a professor out there, and I don't care if she's a part-time or whatever, somebody sanctioned her being on there, and all of us who teach and all that, look, you think, how easy do you think any of us would be able to teach on that campus? Mm-hmm. Somebody who is in the highest position in that department sanctioned her being on that campus and teaching. And what she was saying to that student, it's like, come on, I learned that in my first News Writing 1 class. Exactly. That what she was saying was totally ridiculous. So they need to stop that mythology about it's the best. I'm sure I learned more and enough that I needed to know at the Lincoln University as an undergrad, and I'm sure
the Lincoln University,
right,
as opposed to the Howard University,
right? And he learned what he. That's right. That's right. And Roger as well at Howard. Come on now, come on. They need to stop that mythology. That's ridiculous.
End of the day, we're still complaining. I can remember going to the same comfort zones at the University of Kansas that they're going to today. Nothing has changed. The liberal press, I don't think any of these journalism schools except for Hampton's any good, and maybe Howard's good.
Oh, I know Howard's good. You don't have to think about that.
Thank you. And the University of Arizona, which I have my master's from, is excellent.
I think what it is, and this is what I do agree with you, and I don't think there's nothing you can do about it. It's the good old boy system where the presidents and all these white folks used to do whatever the heck they wanted to do and get away with it. And what they have done is, over the years since slavery, has institutionalized it. So we're looked down as diminished. We're looked on like our voices doesn't matter. And our voices matters, and matter a whole lot. But at the same time, the conditions of the students that are there at the University of Missouri, the conditions of the faculty and the way they think all the way around, and the management and the president of these PWIs think, nothing's changed.
Well, I disagree with him.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I disagree, and that's probably going to be the same thing that Will is saying. I mean, nothing will change if you don't do anything. If you just accept it, power concedes nothing without demand.
But if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, it's insanity. What I'm saying, you got to do something different.
Okay, go ahead, Will.
My point is, they did do something different,
right, exactly.
And they did nonviolent, direct social action. We know that works, and that's what you should do because you want to affect the revenue. They affected the revenue as long as they put together a substantive plan, and they have students across the country in Ithaca, New York, and other places that are standing with them that recognize that, look, this is, I just said, racism is no longer, this is no longer good for business in this country anymore. So let's stop it.
But I'm also thinking that there are some students who might be thinking more than just revenue. I think they have the better nature of ourselves saying, hey, we stand with you even though we might be white, Latino, Asian, because we think that this is the right thing to do. This is the moral thing to do. So I would hope it's not just the revenue from the
But if they want
students.
to change, they have to affect the revenue because no one is going to concede power unless they are forced to.
And here's what they're going to do. Here's what they're going to do at Missouri, I predict. University of Kansas used to have an outstanding football program. Outstanding. And the African Americans that played on that team stood up to the administration. They have diminished that program altogether, and they just concentrate on basketball and track. I'd like to see in 5 years how the Missouri football program looks. I really would. I'd like to see how it looks.
So you think that there will be repercussions?
Let's see.
Based on the fact that they stood up.
Well, it could be it could affect whether the athletes actually want to go there
That's true.
And play there.
That's true too.
And that's a factor too.
That's a factor too.
Revenue factor.
To take us into our next discussion, but I thought this was very interesting. So the Republican candidates for president weighed in on Missouri and what was going on. Donald Trump said, quote, "I think it's just disgusting. I think the two people who resigned are weak, ineffective people." And he said when they resign, they set something in motion that's going to be a disaster for the next long period of time. A couple of people, Ben Carson said that the resignations are a sign of the politically correct police going too far. It's okay to disagree with people, but it's not okay to destroy them. People are so frightened of the politically correct police that they're willing to do things that are irrational in order to appease them. But the one I found most interesting was that Chris Christie said that under President Barack Obama, America's racial divide has worsened. And his quote is, "I don't think anyone can look objectively at where we sit as a country now and say that we're better off than we were 7 years ago on the issue of race in America with Barack Obama as president. In fact, I think he's made it worse."
I agree.
Purely self-serving. They're talking to that small electorate that they need to win within the primary.
But when you say that, then how do you draw? Because one of their issues is allegedly is to bring more African Americans and other minorities into the party.
They're not worried about that right now. What they're worried about is winning the nomination. Mm-hmm. Then once they get to that level, their rhetoric will change, and they'll rely on people's memories going away, or when it gets brought up,
the Hispanic community is going to forget about
it. When it gets brought up, if I can finish, when it gets brought up, what's going to happen? They're going to have a spin. They're going to have a reaction to say to that when it gets brought up in a debate situation or whatever. But the reliance is on what will people remember from now where we sit in November of 2015 up to then. It'll change.
Then Trump is right. Then people are stupid. So maybe he is right. I don't think Trump is going to change. I didn't think he'd be here. But I was reading Ebony magazine, and it's the book by Joan Reed, and it's called Fractured. And she's saying
Reed. Yeah.
She's saying the same thing that the Republican Party is saying. Some of those people are saying about how President Obama, there's a fracture in our society now, and it truly is. And I don't think it has anything to do with the president, but I think there's a fracture. I think what we've done is our kids are now so cuddled in terms of being able to face adversity that they're always running for shelter. They don't run to the fire; they run away from the fire, and they don't do the kinds of things. So what if somebody calls me a name? I could care less. Well, what if somebody, it just doesn't matter anything. I think our kids today are not prepared to deal with the real world as it is, which is evil, racism, all these kinds of things that are going on. And you have to figure out how to get among each other and fight it, or individually fight it. I just think going to all these little collective actions aren't doing anything.
Hold on one second.
And I truly believe, you sit here and laugh, but our kids, I truly believe that our children are weaker than we were. I just don't think they're as strong as we were. I just don't believe that.
Hold on one second. If you're just joining us, we're talking about racial realities in our country today with the Another View Roundtable. Roger Chesley with the Virginian-Pilot, community activist Bill Thomas, and author, journalist, and talk show host Will LaVeist. Go ahead, Will.
Oftentimes we make these comments without context. I think
your context.
During the civil rights movement, the adults at that time would have said the same thing about the young people at that time. They would have said the same thing.
So
previous generations, this is what we constantly see this happen. The next generation says those young people, they don't know what we know, and so forth and so on. Look, every time has a season, and people will rise to the occasion for the moment of what's needed at that time.
Well, and with what Christie said, then, and I do agree with him also that there is a racial divide, but.
Yeah.
Is it because of President Obama being in office, or is it because of the fact that he's in office that people feel that they can say more things than they had been saying in the past?
I think it's more the latter, and I would also say that I think the president, for the most part, kind of ran away from race for the first 6 years of his presidency. So now there seems to be more of a willingness, maybe because he doesn't have to run for re-election anymore. And I think some of these issues that have always been there, but not necessarily always been articulated, are perhaps coming more to the fore. I think it says something about some of the issues in our nation that it is so very hard to have conversations about race. And it's so very hard to feel like either A, you're going to be singled out for, what your ancestors did, or, what type of privilege did you get? What type of advances did you not make when you had the opportunity? And so I think there is a lot of harsh, a defensiveness on everybody's side
just
about the issue.
Quick point.
Go ahead.
I remember, because I lived in a border state, we got on the buses as kids, and we went down to Natchez, Mississippi. We stood in front of the police. We stood in front of the dogs barking. I don't even know how many visions you see children in Kansas City, in Natchez, in Houston, in every place around. Those were children with their parents behind us. Our parents put us on buses and said, go down there and go do what you need to do in junior high school and high school. So I saw thousands of African-American youth standing in front of the law, the man, the sticks, the fire hoses, and everything in Natchez, Mississippi. And so I don't know what you're talking about, Will.
Well, but okay, so could you say today with the students that are protesting on campus today, then that is the 2015 version? I mean, not equating the dogs, I get that, but in terms of speaking out.
That's the I don't see how what he said. I don't see how what he just said contradicts.
It does contradict it. It's better sitting behind the computer.
If you look at the unrest we have seen recently, you see people standing in protest and having to deal with conflict. You see young people standing out there. The other thing I wanted to point out is that if you've been taught all your life that because of someone's darker skin color that they're inferior to you, then all of a sudden you see someone who has that skin color, is it the President of the United States? Don't you think that would mess your head up a little bit?
Yep.
Good point. Go ahead, Roger, and then we're going to take a call.
In different op-eds and different analyses that I've seen in the past year, you also are getting this sense of, especially for the white low and middle classes and some of the ones who maybe have been out of work for a while, you are seeing this fear.
Good point.
Those folks are now getting some of the things that I used to have.
Yeah,
they are getting the access to the jobs that I used to have. And, oh my goodness, are they going to take out the second-class citizenship that they used to have?
Absolutely.
And are they going to try to force me to be that? And I think the changing demographics have something to do with this. And I think there is a fear that they're going to treat us the way we used to treat them.
Absolutely.
And so, I think that is playing into some of the concerns and some of the angst that, and maybe it's more than angst. Maybe it's just, terror that some folks are feeling.
I agree, Roger.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Bianca joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Bianca. You're on the air.
Hi. I just wanted to address the gentleman that said that the generation today are weaker than past generations. I would wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think what we're seeing today is this generation having a zero tolerance to certain things. You see the phrases white privilege, cultural appropriation. These are things that are coming into the ether and spreading in a way that I don't think has ever been spread with other generations. We're actually having a conversation about race and race relations that hasn't really been had, and we're forcing the issue to be talked about. It's not that we don't want to be called something or we're afraid to be treated some way. We know for a fact that we don't feel like we need to ask or wait or take things in stride anymore because that's what our generation before us have done. And I feel like we know that people cannot treat us the way that they've been treating, and we can stand up and fight. I think that's exactly what those kids in Missouri are doing right now, is saying we have a zero tolerance. We're not going to give you 3 strikes. We're going to see something and immediately want a change, and it's going to spread, especially through social media.
Okay, Bianca, thank you so much for your call. I see you all nodding in
That's
agreement.
What I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. And I think, again, this notion that, the next generation is weaker. You hear that with each generation. And again, you forget that even during the Civil Rights Movement, there were parents that did not want their kids going out there and was telling them not to go out there. There were black leaders that was saying, Martin Luther King, don't come here.
Absolutely.
Don't interrupt what us Negroes got going on here. You messing up things. So we make these statements without giving proper context, as if all of this stuff is new. It's not new. It's just different. It's a different time.
Not true. Not true. The African-American middle class has grown, and I take a connection with what Roger has said. There was a study came out that said white folks between the age 35 and 54 are dying faster, the whole 9 yards, economic erosion. Those people are frightened to death. That's why Donald Trump can get up there and say whatever he wants to say, and it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. Those folks are scared. Here's what I am saying is the fact that my parents lived through the Depression. They feared hunger. They feared lynchings. They feared all of those things. So they tried to teach us to be stronger, to stand up to those actual things that could put physical blunt in your lives. Hunger, no jobs, no house, no nothing, no dignity, no respect, no religion, no Miss America, no captain of the football team, no nothing. So we went through all that. So that made us harder. So we understood that we had to meet that and challenge it and go forward with it. I think our kids today, my kids, they're strong and good and smart, but they don't have that where they feel that all of it can be taken away from them. So that's why I'm saying they're weaker, because we understood it because we were taught that.
Okay. Roger, last one, then we'll go into the next topic.
I don't disagree that, yes, could our children be perhaps a little bit of sterner stuff? Sure. And, perhaps we too, even my generation probably could have done that too. But don't you think that it's important that they shouldn't have to deal with some of these things that our parents and grandparents? I mean, we should have progressed by now, that we should have, more equality, more equity. And I think to demand that, to see that and to recognize that, yes, we're not going to take this stuff because those battles should have been fought already, and we think that should be a time that's passed.
Barbara, I just think we should be careful to take an example of what happened in our individual household. One example that he had with his children, and blanket an entire generation. And blanket an entire generation. We got a big country. I grew up in the Northeast. Different things happen in the Northeast and happen in the Southeast and happen in the Midwest. Don't just take your example because
I'm not taking
because
my
you
example.
said your kids are not ready. Mine are.
My kids,
mine are.
My kids have gone to the best schools in the world. They did all that stuff. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, when I was growing up in the 70s, we had the Black Panthers. We didn't take that stuff. We went out on the streets. I was a Black Panther. Let me finish it.
You were?
That whole generation got wiped out.
You better be
that
careful.
whole leadership got. I'm not careful because I'm not afraid.
Ben Carson made some statements that are not being unraveled.
No, that's not true either. You getting on him because he's black. All I'm saying is the fact that whole generation was wiped out. Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, Angela Davis. That whole generation of leadership was wiped out in maybe 10 years.
They morphed into the hip hop. They morphed into the hip hop generation.
No, they ain't morphed no.
Tupac Shakur was he continued that legacy. What are you talking about?
All I'm saying, they were
killed. You will find them in the hip hop generation.
They were killed and murdered. That whole generation was killed and murdered. Most of the leadership there was killed and murdered by design, by the FBI, and just wiped out. So we know how to pay the price. We know what the price is. Martin Luther King, we've seen so many people, from Huey to all these people, were all wiped out with the same basic idea to Malcolm, everybody else. All that leadership was cleaned out and wiped out. So here we are today, basically at the same position. Our communities are poor in terms of being able to finish school, have income, have access. We don't own that much. We don't own as much as we used to own. We don't have the structured families that we used to have because we don't have the unity of a dad and a mom in the house doing the kind of things that need to be done. So actually, I got to go with this book. Our society is fractured. Lastly, President Obama came to Hampton before he was elected, and he had a very good speech he gave. I think that took him over to the top. He called it the Quiet Riots. And you need to go get back and read that. He talked about all this stuff. I mean, it's just like a mirror of what's happening today, but he didn't do anything about it, but he did talk about it at that time.
And the question is, what do we do about it? Let's talk to Justin from Hampton. Hi, Justin, you're on the air.
Hi, panelist. I'm actually calling specifically about subculture within the African American community. Like any of the other large races in the United States, the Hispanic community, to a large extent, Mexicans stay within their own, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, South Americans stay within their own cultures, and if something comes up, whether it is Donald Trump talking about Mexicans, really the Hispanic community stays out of it except for the Mexican community. They're large in the United States, but it really doesn't, Puerto Ricans really don't care to a certain extent. Within the white community, you have Germans, Europeans, Italians, French, so Jewish. But then when it comes to the African American community, because you are that color, everyone has to be on board with the African American agenda. How is it that whether you are from an urban or rural society, whether you're in a ghetto or you are affluent, the loudest voice is the one that runs the agenda? So when you have children on campuses that, to a certain extent, or even if it's Ferguson or South Carolina, you have the largest voice is the one that is heard. Now, what about the other affluent African Americans? They have to go along with that loud voice, or else they're considered, you're acting white. How can you explain that being on a panel? How do you explain that you can't have differences within the African American community?
Okay, Justin, we'll take that on as a question. Do you all agree with him that we are a monolith and that we don't have different opinions?
Well, I would respond to it this way. If you're listening to this panel, obviously the question is no. The answer is no. And then I would also ask him to look within the white community. What is the loudest voice that you hear right now? Isn't it the Tea Party? Isn't it the far right in terms of loudest voices within the so-called white community? Does everyone walk in lockstep with that? No. Yeah. So what is he talking about?
The Tea Party
there is a perception sometimes that the black community, if it is separate in thought, that, well, I'm just saying that if there's a difference in thought, that we're not united and that we have to all walk in lockstep. And
I think that perception comes from people who are outside of the community, trying to define the community. And that's why I challenge the caller to look within the community that he knows best and ask that question. Right now, the loudest voices that have been able to move and disrupt a lot of things in government has been the smallest electorate. They're the loudest. So, and clearly, all of white America does not fall in lockstep with the Tea Party. So some of that is human nature.
Yeah, and we know that there's a large percentage of African Americans who, when they vote, and the party that they most identify with is the Democratic Party, but it's not total, and that's as much a part of what is the message that the major parties are giving out. We are obviously, as a race, we are joined by our history, one of slavery, one of Jim Crow, one of forced segregation. So naturally, I think there's a certain kinship among every person who's black in this country of that struggle, of that subjugation that took place over centuries. But to say that we walk in lockstep, we don't. And as Will was saying, you know, I don't always agree with Will. I don't always agree with Bill. And sometimes my wife doesn't agree with me. So, I think that the beauty of it is, if you are a thinking person, if you are a literate person, if you are someone who likes to engage with others, that you can come up with certain conclusions and you can see certain plans and blueprints that might be good for us as a people. And the beauty of that is to keep on engaging, keep on learning, keep on, questioning and looking at your own viewpoints to see if they hold up. And
I guess
that's great.
I agree. I kind of agree both ways. We're definitely different. I was always raised that the African American in America was superior. because the universe started in Africa. We never saw ourselves as inferior. We always saw ourselves not as being biased or anything, but superior. We always saw that. We were always taken to a little town called Nicodemus, Kansas, which was the first incorporated African-American town in the United States of America, hundreds of years ago. And it had a black mayor, black city manager, and we used to do pilgrimage to go down there to see how black people could take control of themselves. When we went to Kansas, when we were kicked out of our family group, were kicked out of Texas because we went to war against the Union because they didn't give us what they said they were going to give us. We were taught to take the gun, the Second Amendment, as our most important weapon against being equal. And we were always taught to fight to the end to defend every ounce of what we deserved. Mm-hmm. I have never in my whole life seen myself as inferior. I don't believe it. I just never have done that. In my family, it was just never, ever thought that way. We were saying, well, y'all arrogant and this and that and the other. So I never saw that. So I never had that context. So we always saw ourselves different. We were Republicans because Republicans freed the slaves, and they went to Kansas, and we did well there. So we're not the same. We don't see ourselves collective, and we don't see ourselves bound by color.
Okay, next topic. Go ahead,
I was
going to
say real quickly, I think even the Republican Party could very easily get black votes if it eschewed the white racist element of the party. Mm-hmm. That's why people don't vote for this. A lot of the ideas are sensible ideas, but you can't be for a party that harbors that mindset and that ideology either, and says then to say, well, yeah, I'm going to vote for them. No.
I think the Democrats do the same thing. So.
Next. All right. So Norfolk, the city of Norfolk this coming May has a chance to elect a new mayor. Mayor Frame announced in October he's not going to seek another term. This week, State Senator Kenny Alexander joined Sheriff Bob McCabe and City Councilman Andy Protegaro in declaring his desire to be mayor. Are we ready in Norfolk for a black mayor?
Oh, sure we are. But the question is, do you get enough people to come out for the particular candidate who is black? I mean, will enough people come out and support him? And Kenny is unlike some of the other candidates who might run or might still jump in. I mean, he is an interesting candidate in the fact that he doesn't necessarily play that as his lead card. Right. He is so much, in terms of what are you doing for business, what are you doing for economic development. Yes, he happens to be black, but he is perhaps not like some other black candidates who would run. And I see among the three candidates a lot of overlapping constituencies. And so it will be interesting to see who actually does win, because you have a lot of them pulling from the same business, employment, other things like that in terms of, where they're going to get their votes from. So
basically all three of them probably will campaign on the same platform in terms of issues.
I think they very much will. And so some of the black support that might go to McCabe and then might go to Protegaro, Kenny might pick up. But on the other hand, I think there's going to be a fight for every single vote out there, and that's probably a good thing. I think you should be addressing the needs of the whole city, and so we'll see. It really, I think, is going to come down to who campaigns the best, what type of organizations they have to get out the vote, and it's obvious neither one of them will be the type of mayor that Paul Frame has been. I think it's a bit of a change in the guard in that respect, because I think some of the behind-the-scenes power that Paul Frame exercised, I'm not sure if either one of them are going to have that same type of clout.
Any of the three.
Right.
Interesting. Bill?
Oh, I just think the change in the guard, I think, is good. And I've known Kenny Alexander for 25 years. He's balanced. He has a good way of thinking. He thinks in economic terms. And for instance, for Hampton and HBCUs, he's been on the economic development side of getting laws passed that have actually helped us. He looks evenly at what we need to do with this public school issue. I've seen him on both sides dealing with things. He's a businessman, a husband. Mm-hmm. He understands all the kinds of things. And if there was ever going to be on the right side of history, and I see some of these other politicians that are below him in the African American community are choosing sides, they're going to be on the wrong side of history, I believe, because if you ever had an agent, in my judgment, that talked to all the communities the same, it's well balanced. He's been a delegate. He's been a senator. He sat on the planning commission and things for the city. He understands it, and he's just fair. And for all I can say, he's got legislation passed for HBCUs that have helped us. Mm-hmm. He stood the line when things came up, when we need to have him support the HBCUs, and Kenny has gone against the Democrats, and he's gone with the Republicans, and vice versa. So he gets things done, and can ask for more than that.
One of the things I've heard is that people go, well, if you're already a state senator, why? And you could go on to congressional or Senate, et cetera. Why would you go back, quote unquote, to being mayor?
I had a chance to talk to him about a little bit about that, because that's some of the same question I have. And this was a few weeks ago before he would formally announce. And he has a lot of love for Norfolk. And let's face it, a mayor does have, perhaps being one of 8 is a little bit different than being one of 140. And the chance to kind of put your own stamp on something, the chance to have leadership there is still important. Now, this doesn't preclude that he might not, at some later point, go and seek statewide office. I know his name has been bandied about a little bit about that in terms of either, especially lieutenant governor and governor. But this is a time when he can do that, and I don't believe he'll lose his Senate seat if he should lose the mayoral race.
I was going to ask, what happens to his Senate seat then?
Yeah, I don't think he'll lose that if he loses the mayoral race.
So he doesn't have to step down.
No,
I don't believe so. I
was going to make the same point as Roger. If all politics is local, really, the more local you get, the more meaningful the work that you can do. It would make perfect sense, because if he's at the state legislature level or at the congressional level, we see what's happening. Your ability to really put your stamp on something gets more and more diluted. Mm-hmm. So as Roger just pointed out, as being one of 8 in a city that he really loves and cares about, and obviously with some of his accomplishments, he's somebody that really looks to actually get something done. That's a good
and also to jump in, plus also he's in the minority right now. His party is in the minority in the state Senate.
For the next 4 years.
And so that is also something you're limited in what you can actually get done when that's the case. Even if you have the governor's same party, you're limited in what can actually get out of the general.
Because it's always about the number of votes. It's always about the number of votes that you can get. So
if he were to become mayor, hypothetically, is there an heir apparent to his Senate seat?
I'm not aware.
Anybody think?
I'm not aware.
But he could become like a Cory Booker. I just see him in that reasonable, sound, fair, some like, some most do like. I see him in that thing where things need to be changed. The education thing needs to be worked on realistically. Economic development in our communities that are also been hurting so long. I think he'll do those kind of things. Now, he did some historic legislation for HBCUs and economic development, so I think he'll just be great.
I don't know that he'll have that there will be the same fervor for him that maybe other candidates might have, but I definitely think that there's a low dislike factor. And what do I mean? I don't think he naturally engenders anger toward him. I think he's pretty much of an even-keeled politician. I mean, he's a politician like everybody else is, but I think his appeal can be very broad, and I think that could very well help him in the election
and long term.
Yeah.
So, what do you think would be a major change from the way that the city is currently run?
Good old boy.
Once somebody new comes into office, what's going to be the big thing? Go ahead.
Good old boy.
Yeah.
Good old boy. White privilege got to be broken. Now, that I do agree with the students, and I think that is coming across. This good old boy, institutionalized racism, picking projects that are not illegal, so to speak. And they were talking about Phil Hamilton still in jail. I saw that in the paper today. But that good old boy, institutionalized racism, that pick and chooses winners from the back closets and cigar smoke rooms has got to stop.
I think the paper, the Pilot has reported a lot in the last couple of years of some of the mentality that goes on and how projects get passed in both Norfolk and Virginia Beach especially. And there seems to be this favoritism that goes to certain businessmen, to certain people who pull up projects. And that's major because first of all, you don't know if the process has been fair. And second of all, you don't know if the taxpayers' money is being used wisely and fairly as well. And I think that there are still huge vestiges of that in both Norfolk and Virginia Beach. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right.
No, and in Virginia, Lord knows.
And so hopefully in the change in leadership will help bring that about. Not necessarily saying it's been illegal, but definitely there is some question of, has it been an open process? Has everybody gotten a fair shake at getting contracts and getting jobs and the like?
Okay, and with that, guess what, guys? The roundtable is done. Isn't that quick?
Wow.
So I want to thank Will LaVeist and Bill Thomas and Roger Chesley for joining us, and hopefully Carol will be back with us next month. Absolutely.
So we solved all the world's problems again.
And we solved all the world's problems again, and we'll do it again the second Friday of December, and we will be right back.
Hello, this is Spike Lee. What's happening? And you listen to Another View, 89.5 FM on WHRO.
You just never know who is listening to Another View. How about that? And I want to thank our roundtable for another lively exchange today with our pundits. If you'd like to hear the show again or share it with a friend, you have a couple of options. You can download the podcast at our website, anotherviewradio.org, or you can find it on iTunes or on WHRO.org. You can also go to the WHRO YouTube channel and watch the show online. And to find out what we're talking about in future shows, sign up for our eView newsletter. Check us out on Facebook or send me a tweet at Barbara Ham Lee. Don't forget our next Race Let's Talk About It Town Hall meeting. It's next Thursday, November the 19th from 6 until 8 p.m. right here at WHRO. There is a waiting list to get into the studio, but you can watch the town hall live and chat with us online. Visit WHRO.org/talkaboutrace to find out more. Next week, Lisa Godley has the chair. She and Dr. Keith Newby will talk about the HIV/AIDS epidemic here in Hampton Roads. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Kamaria Mason answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.